You are streaming live with Uncomfortable Conversations Talk Radio, the show that encourages, equips, and empowers you to have uncomfortable conversations on hot topics with people who don't share your same beliefs. Your host, Sabrina Protic, Ricky Burney, and Joel Holt. Now let's get ready to have that conversation. Uncomfortable Conversations is powered by the Trendsetter Mentor Group, an exclusive membership for mentorship on Facebook.
Good morning, Tampa Bay and beyond. We're coming at you from Tampa Bay. You've kind of heard that terminology, right? Yeah, I know. Smile, Brett. Smile, not Brett, Joel. Smile, Joel. Smile. So
yeah, that's funny.
My name is Sabrina Protic. I am an author of the book Growing Ages, Think Young and Live Younger, certified life coach and financial coach. And we're streaming live with you today. And we're just going to have an action-packed show today. I got on screen with me Joel Holt. He is one of our co-hosts, and he's going to be helping us unpack our topic today. Joel, how was your weekend?
It was actually a nice weekend, Super Bowl weekend. So outside of getting dumped on with the snow, you still had an eventful, had a Super Bowl. I guess you could call it a good game. It was more like a blowout.
Yeah, I know. I think we were all, ready for, an extensive game and to be up like, oh, what's going to happen? It kind of flew past us, didn't it?
Yeah, you expected a shootout, but, the best team won. So I guess that's all that matters.
Well, the best team on that day, it just all depends on what happens. And the mojo just wasn't happening for one team, but it was still a good game. So, so snow, I was battling sunshine. I actually had my air conditioning on.
No, we haven't had so much snow in almost 20 years in Chicago like this. And so we really got dumped on. It's snowing every day over here.
Oh, wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about why you and I are here today and what Uncomfortable Conversation is all about. Because a lot of people don't know, what we do. So just so everybody knows who's on our show and respect for our co-host, today we're going to have Chastity Saunier. She's managing partner of RBC Consulting Firm and also DBA Sapphire Services, Vice President of Operations for the Restore Her movement. And she's also the founder and president of Sisters in Christ, which she's had the privilege of being a part of for 20 years. She's led that. And you just heard from Mr. Joel Holtz. He's the creative director for Thriving Women, which he does an outstanding job, Thriving Women Network. And so we want to welcome Joel and Chastity to our show as we talk about uncomfortable conversation. Well, when you hear the word uncomfortable conversation, you kind of, maybe the hairs go up on the back of your neck because you get the feeling that somebody's about to talk about something that you may not want to talk about. Or maybe somebody's going to ask you your views and opinions of things that could be a little bit edgy and a little bit dicey. Well, how do we handle uncomfortable conversations? And is it really necessary to have them? Well, if you've been through life, if you're above the age of 21, I will have to say yes, because you've talked about some things, whether it's a mom or a dad, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, an employer, but you've had to cover some ground about something. So our mission each week is to empower our viewers to have uncomfortable conversations on personal, social issues that affect all of us. As we enlighten our viewers on these things, we want people to feel comfortable sharing their perspectives, even though they may be at the total opposite end of the spectrum. We don't want to shy away from these topics because they can be very impactful and actually can shape our society, our homes, our personal lives, our employment. So we want to be able to have a platform to have these uncomfortable conversations. Avoidance is not the answer. That only just makes the problem bigger, and then it becomes explosive to the point that you can't discuss it rationally. So the way we accomplish talking about uncomfortable conversation each week is to help our guests navigate through these topics and to open up the floor for them to share their perspectives with respect, dignity, and forethought. We don't want to have debates. We want to hear real thoughts and real comments and real perspectives on a platform where they feel comfortable to share their views on things without any type of pushback. You know, when Joel, I don't know about you, but when someone wants to talk to you about something, you know, when you're young and not experiencing conversation, sometimes rather than listening to the person, you're thinking about firing back. Right, Joel?
Right.
You're so focused on, let them finish their point so I can fire back. And you're so focused on firing back, you've missed some quality content from that person. And then you almost don't even understand their point of view because you never really heard it. Well, we want to hear, right? We want to hear points of view. And so with that being said, on our show today, we're going to have uncomfortable conversation with retired coach, with retired place kickers on our show. They're going to help us talk about the integrity of the game, professional sports on the NFL. They're going to talk about how dealing with uncomfortable conversations impact them as players on and off the field. And when we come back, we're going to break this down with two of our guests, and we'll act on our hot topic. And Joel Holtz will interview our two special guests when we come back after watching this brief video.
Uncomfortable Conversations Talk Radio is sponsored by the Trendsetter Mentor Group, an exclusive membership for mentorship. You can follow all our hosts on Facebook. Search Trendsetter Mentor Group and join. Now back to the show.
They're going to set it at the 22. An attempt of 32 yards for the win.
Only 50% this season from between 30 and 40, as you saw.
It is right down the middle.
As you said, Charlie, right down the middle. The greatest comeback in the history of the NFL. And we were there.
And the celebration begins in Buffalo.
And the reaction on the other side, considerably different. Up 35-3. What is there to say? Good catch there by Reich.
And again, as we have mentioned time and time again, you are witnessing the greatest comeback in the history of the National Football League. Down 32 points with 13 minutes and 19 seconds left to go in the third. And the Buffalo Bills have engineered an unbelievable wild card, come from behind, record-setting wild card playoff victory here at Rich Stadium.
A wild, 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 wild card playoff victory.
Wow.
All right, welcome back to Uncomfortable Conversations Morning Show. We invited two passionate men to the show to continue our conversation on sports betting, ethical or unethical. Each of these men share a perspective of the game that we can all learn from. Let's start with Super Bowl 35 field goal kicker Steve Christie. Super Bowl 38 field goal kicker Steve Christie. Christie, who grew up in Oakville, Ontario, graduated from the College of William & Mary and made his NFL debut with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 1990. He made all 27 extra point attempts and 23 of 27 field goal tries in his rookie season. He would end up playing 2 years for the Buccaneers. From 1992 to 2000, Christie kicked for Buffalo. with the Bills, he would become one of the game's top kickers. He was a key contributor in the Bills' comeback win against the Houston Oilers, in which Buffalo rallied from a 32-point deficit to complete the largest comeback victory in NFL history. Christie kicked a successful onside kick, which he recovered himself, becoming the first place kicker ever to do so in an NFL playoff game, and kicked the game-winning 32-yard field goal in overtime. His kicking shoe from that game is displayed in the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton. He then went on to kick 5 field goals in the Bills' 29-10 win over the Miami Dolphins in the AFC Championship game, helping Buffalo get to their 3rd consecutive Super Bowl.
Wow. Steve, I mean, that is just an outstanding standing ovation. That video, the kick, I've watched that kick before. I mean, just phenomenal. And I want to ask you, how do you feel when you see that again?
Well, good morning to you both. I got a real kick about seeing Marv Levy again and seeing him jump up and down and so happy. It was a wild card game, but coming back from halftime down by so much and to get into the game, just a hair here, just so you know the context of it all. At halftime, Gerald Talley was running through the locker room saying, "All right, guys, it's not over. It's not over. We can do this." And our end of the locker room was kind of saying, "Yeah, look, we're at home. Let's make this respectful." And Frank Reich came out and threw an interception, which they ran back for a touchdown. So we kind of looked down the sideline and said, "Hey, that's not what we were talking about." But things changed quickly in that game. And because of how it finished and the opportunity that I had to finish the game off, which was, I can't even describe it. Even now, it was what a feeling. But I learned a lot from that game and about hanging in there when the chips are down. And Marv Levy always talked about resilience and sticking in there when things are tough and playing it through because you never know. And I think from that game onward, people know to never leave a game in Buffalo, regardless of the score, because you never know. That spirit is still alive there, and we're starting to see it come back now with the current team. That there's a real fight about the team, and it didn't work out this year, but they did very well, and they did better than they have in a long time. And I think that's carried on, and people refer to that game still as one of those lessons, life lessons, where you know what, it looks really bad, and it's a mountain to climb, but somehow with all of us together and all phases of the game coming together, we climbed that mountain, conquered it.
Steve, I don't know if you remember the feeling and emotion at that point, but did you think you could do it?
I think there was a point in the fourth quarter when we started getting pretty close. And then I think at one point we actually got ahead of the Oilers and they botched up a field goal attempt. And we knew that the momentum had changed. We had some really big plays. Andre Reed had a number of big plays. Obviously, Frank Reich played a tremendous second half of the game. And then Nate Odoms with a huge interception in overtime. I mean, all these keys to the comeback kind of fit together. And I think on the sideline, once we got back into the game, momentum had definitely shifted to our way. And it was up to us really to take that momentum and carry it through.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that moment with us. We wanted to honor you with that. You certainly changed the face of professional football. And you made a good point. We can carry this in our personal lives, our business lives, that, it's never over until it's over. Even at the bleakest of times, you got to play it down to the last second. You just got to get in there and keep doing it. So thank you for being on the show today. We also have another special guest today, Mr. Gary Rogers. If we can bring him on. There he is. Hey, Gary, how you doing?
Good morning. I'm good.
Excellent. So nice to see you here. Going to talk a little bit about you. You are a retired Canadian Football League player. And during your 6-year period in life while playing the sport that you love, you learned about giving the best of yourself in the game of life. And getting yourself physically and mentally ready for the sport was something that you've been doing all your life, though it's not really an easy task. You just learned how to do it, and you knew it needed to be done. And you have stated that what we needed to learn through life is that making better choices outside of the sport is something that we needed to implement. These are tough choices. And, some areas that we needed to improve in on how we treat others, changing our attitudes, and even working on your communication skills by taking a Dale Carnegie course. That says a lot for a professional ball player to want to work on his interpersonal skills and how to deal with and communicate with people. And Dale Carnegie is a great, great course to take for that. It was making these conscious efforts in your life and working on these things that you finally realized that in order to give 100% in sports, that you had to first be the best that you could in the game of life. We are so excited to have you on this show, and welcome. And tell us just a little bit about, your perspective a little bit on the game of life and sports.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Joel, Sabrina. Nice to see you, Steve. And I was getting chills watching that video of yours, and I was like, oh, man, I could just imagine the excitement there. So that's a great way to start off the show. But, it wasn't, so Sabrina, I didn't just like wake up one day and say, you know what, I'm going to change. I'm going to change some things in my life. It wasn't like things were going great and then I wanted to change. Usually when we change is when we hit like lows. There might be like some kind of humbling moment that happens. We get cut in our sport, loss of a family member, a disease, a bad grade, getting cut on the team in high school. So for me, I had a humbling moment. We'll call it a big moment called like rock bottom. And so it wasn't until I hit this rock bottom moment in an off season, I was still playing after my second year. That's when I decided I need to look at myself in the mirror and, man, what's going on, Gary? I mean, you got to do some things differently. And I looked at myself physically and on the inside. Physically, I still needed to work out, lift weights, do all that. I still needed to make the team. But I knew there were like 4 or 5 areas in my life that I was not doing the right stuff with. And so they weren't like illegal per se, but they were not what I believed in. And so that humbling moment in that winter time got me to a place to actually open my eyes and get the blinders off and say, Gary, let's do something about it.
Wow. I mean, and that, like you said, that's one of the most powerful things we can do is work on the inner person. Mm-hmm. So, congratulations to you on that. What I'd like to do with both of you is I'd like each of you to share your passion and purpose for retiring from the game that you love. And then how did everybody, have you guys met, Gary and Steve? Have you met?
Not until today.
Not until today. Okay. Wow. Look at what we brought together at the same table. So tell us about your passion and your purpose for, retiring. Just give us a few tidbits on that.
Gary, you want to lead this or?
Oh, sure. I'll do it. So, I was in forced retirement, we'll say. You know what that is, Steve? Forced, like most of the players got cut after my 6th year. Which was like, hey, I got another 5 in me. But anyway, you know what? I learned. So Sabrina, I learned at that rock bottom moment, I started making changes, right? Through those changes, it was in 1997 when I put it all together, made changes on the inside, the outside, finally knew what 100% was all about as an athlete and as a person. Mm-hmm. And I came up with these 3 words after the season called Check Your Game. And that was 23 years ago when I put those words together. And I'm excited about sharing that message with others. And really, check is to examine yours about oneself. Game is defined as a business, sport, your passion, and also the game of life. And I realized after I created those words, check your game, I realized that previously to that season, I had applied this check your game concept. I examined my game of life, and the result was I was able to give my best. And so today what I do is I share people's stories. It doesn't matter what background, how old you are. It is for everybody. And I share stories about checking your game. I share what's the time when they applied this in their life, and then I ask them for advice. And Steve, like you're saying, when when you're going in at halftime, and you end up coming back and everything, and for the city, for your team in Buffalo, that situation gave empowerment, gave confidence. It gave for others that they can do it too, that they might come back. So fans, stay there. And so I'm doing the same thing with people's stories. I'm giving people confidence. I'm giving them empowerment. I'm giving them this ability to impact others who feel like they may be all alone, but really we know that they're not alone.
Excellent, Gary. So you found passion in life. You took your skills of internalizing and learning how to communicate and deal with people and turn it into an empowerment movement for people. So that's kind of how you moved into retirement. Like you said, it wasn't a choice, but then you took what life handed you. Was, hey, take a lemon, life hands you lemonade, hands you lemon, make lemonade. And that's kind of what you did. Steve, tell us a little bit about retirement for you.
I was drafted in the CFL as a Canadian citizen. That's how they do it up there. And I was in the first rounder, and I thought, okay, that's good to know. And that I really wanted to stay in the NFL, or at least stay down in the, as we call them, the States, and play down here as long as I could. I never really expected to make it. I worked out, excuse me, with a number of teams at school at William & Mary. And even the Cowboys said, go back to Edmonton. That's where they drafted you. That's where they want you. You're not good enough to make it in the NFL. And I took it to heart. My special teams coach at school took it to heart. And, it was one of those deals because of that situation of being told that you're not good enough. When I did make the roster with Tampa, I was surprised as well. There's a lot of things that happened, a lot of cogs in the machine that went my way for that to happen. But because of that experience, and because of sort of almost being a shot across the bow, is to say, hey, man, you've already been warned that this can be taken away at any time. And with that being said, when that day comes, because like Gary said, you don't know when it's coming, and very few people get to pick when they leave the game. No one's Jerry Rice, who plays 21 years and says, okay, I'm going to quit. I'm going to retire. It doesn't happen like that for most guys. And like Gary said, I can play 5 more years. But in my case, not knowing when I was going to be released for the last time, what else am I going to do? What is this platform that I have now as a pro athlete? What can that lead to? Life after football. How is this going to help me? So I started working for a Canadian network, covering Super Bowls, just doing as much as I can at, something else other than football, something else other than sports. I was an art major at William & Mary. I paint, and I continue to do that now. But that's something that, don't give it up, because, hey, I'm invincible. I'm in my 20s. I'm in the league. You're getting paid and all these positive things. But reality will set in eventually, so that, especially later in my career, I started doing more and more things to prepare for retirement. And that's my message to the younger guys. It's my message to guys coming in the league saying, hey, man, especially in my last few years, I was in San Diego, then the New York Giants. I was moving my family all over the place to play with, at the time, our youngest daughter was just a baby. So there's my wife driving from Buffalo, New York to San Diego with 2 dogs and a baby. And there I am living in a hotel, right? So, I mean, these things are part of the game. But then again, you knew that at a certain point it's going to end. So then what are you going to do? And I think some guys handle it very well, and then other guys just are not prepared for it, because I played other sports growing up. I'm sure most of us have, but and playing in the NFL wasn't my dream. I grew up being a soccer player and being, that's what I wanted to do, but I knew it wasn't in the cards for me, and I went to kicking and punting, and that's how it worked. But at the end of the day, I'm always thankful for the opportunity that I had to be able to play in the league. But like I said before, you never know when that's going to come to an end. And then what are you going to do? You have a family, you're responsible for them, and I'm also into coaching too, because I think for me, coaching is a platform where I can help younger men and try to lead them on the right path. And again, going back to the Houston game, I kind of warned them. I said, you know what, being a kicker is difficult at times. And when you miss, everybody sees it. And that's a lesson that I kind of carry through to my guys. It's kind of a life lesson. And, you have to be resilient. You have to be tough because life throws you curveballs, and you have to be ready to face them.
Steve, thank you so much, because you just talked about uncomfortable conversation, and both of you said it's not a voluntary action. When you retire, and just at what age, Steve, were you retired?
Late 30s. I played 15 years. My last year was with the Giants in 2004, and there was some talk of me going back, but my body may have been ready, but I think mentally I was done. The pressure of kicking in the NFL, there's just, when you're young, like I was in the Houston game, or I was in a couple Super Bowls, I'm not saying it's easier to handle, but when you're young, I don't think you think about it as much. But one thing that always, stayed in the back of my mind was the fact that when I did sign with Buffalo, I replaced Scott Norwood. And Scott, who's a tremendous, tremendous guy, had a tremendous career, but unfortunately will be remembered for one kick against the Giants in the Super Bowl. And that's a lesson in itself.
Wow.
And I learned from that as well. So here I am. And I have to say this, uncomfortable. When I signed with Buffalo, I flew in from Tampa, arrived with my parents and my agent, and there were 1,500 Bills fans outside of the stadium boycotting my arrival. Now, I realized that whoever the next guy was going to get that treatment. What was funny to me was that Scott was from Virginia, went to James Madison. I went to William & Mary, also a Virginia school, but I'm from Canada, literally down the road from the stadium. Like, this is my home NFL team. And that's how my initial greeting was people that love Scott so much. And that I learned a lot from that. And I realized that I had to earn the respect of the players and the fans and the coaches immediately, because I was coming in for somebody that was so well. And that was, I'm telling you what, there's life lessons in the league, but it's not easy. It's not as easy as what people want to believe, right?
Yeah, the glory of the story, I call it. Thank you so much for sharing that. Gary, how old were you when you retired?
Well, when forced retirement, I was 29.
Oh, this uncomfortable conversation and I don't know about you, Joel, but when I hear the word retirement, I think about 60, 55, 60, right? When we hear retirement, these guys were involuntarily retired in their 20s and 30s. Talk about uncomfortable conversation. We'll talk more about that. Steve, even that unwelcome welcome party that you had. So these are, we're going deep here. I want to kind of float to something here. We're going to kind of go back to our topic and get on the topic of what we finished last week. Last week we were talking about sports and betting with unethical, and this was with Brett Masters, a former collegiate player for the Hurricanes, and Cane for life. That's what he says. And the moral side to that, and of betting and the effects that it has on the minds of the players. And I've had some individual conversations with both of you about that, and it can go very deep and very mental. So we're going to continue that conversation a little bit now. Because I'm going to be sharing some statistics and things, you might hear me read this, but I want to be clear on what I'm saying. In 2016, NCAA study of nearly 23,000 student athletes found that 53% of men reported gambling for money, and 24% reported violating the NCAA bylaws by wagering on sports for money. 11% of the Division I football players and 5% of men basketball players reported betting on college games in their sport, not involving their team. If college truly did want gambling, they would lobby to make all gambling lines on college sports illegal, said David Ridderpath, an associate professor of sports management at Ohio University. It has to be an either or, not a just. Hey, he said, it's illegal. We know what's going on. We know it. Man, we make a ton of cash, he said, but we can look the other way. With that said, Supreme Court ruling in May 2018 cleared all 50 states to offer legal sports betting if they chose to. Does legalized gambling make the problem better or worse? When you hear these stats on the impact of sports betting on the college players and NFL players as well, what comes to mind and what brings this clarity to a real issue? I'd like to get your thoughts on that, Gary, and then Steve.
So I was taking notes because like my memory isn't the best. So let me look at my notes. 2016. I mean, those are some amazing stats. You know, obviously there's lots of gambling going on, and that's probably first of all because of technology. You know, with technology going on, it makes everything easier. I personally, I don't like this gambling thing, but it's not the gambling that, you know, I think the foundational issue is probably, it's about finances, you know, and most of the athletes that are in college, you know, they don't have money. I mean, they're getting scholarships, and you know, a lot of them had this Pell Grant, which I don't know. I feel like I remember it's like $900. You know, as soon as that Pell Grant came in, you know, that's, hey, I got money. Like people buying stuff, you know, but that's nothing. I mean, no, you didn't have to pay for anything, but okay, I'm getting off topic, but it comes down to this. I need money. And that's why you see athletes signing autographs, maybe getting in trouble, you know, selling their autographs, you know, up at Ohio State or different things like that. But it really comes down to this foundation of like, man, I need money. I mean, I don't have any money to buy anything. My family doesn't have money. And so when you know what some of these, your not teammates, but your opponents, you know, and some of them were your teammates at school, you got the inside scoop. You know, I kind of knew about the SEC because players on my team knew players on the other teams, and I'd always hear Chris Gray from Auburn, you know, he's a center and whatever, you know, just all these different players. And so you get this, oh yeah, this guy's hurt, this guy. And so you can kind of get a little, you got the inside scoop, you got an inside look more so than somebody that's not playing. And so I get that, I get with technology, the inside scoop, you know, like lack of funds, why you would get into that. I don't believe that's a solution. I mean, the solution isn't pulling a weed, it's getting the root, you know? And so, because I know this gambling thing or any other, you know, choice, like, I don't think, cause you know, I've gambled, I've gone to the casino and stuff, and I got stories about that. It's not good. It's not a good thing. And you don't want to keep going through life, going down that road. And anyway, I don't know, Sabrina, if that was exactly what you wanted to hear.
You know, and I'm glad you narrowed in on that. College students need money. They need cash. The statement was made. Hey, it's cash. So yeah, I mean, it's, I won't say it's an easy route to take, but when you're in college and you're, you know, relying on mom and dad, you hadn't exactly hit the big time yet. You know, they're doing it for the need. Steve, what do you think on that?
To get involved, it's hard to get out. I mean, if you get involved with point shaving, or you know, even before our Super Bowls, the NFL would come in and say, "Look, gambling is huge for the Super Bowl. They bet on everything, from the coin toss to who scores first to who scores last to you name it. They bet on everything." And the NFL basically said, if anybody approaches you, you tell an official immediately. And being a kicker, hey, if I go out there and shank a 20-yarder, you don't think that's obvious? I mean, this is one example, and I'm not saying that's happened, but it's certainly possible. And in college, hey, Gary made a great point. These guys are on scholarship, but there's money to live on, and a lot of them don't have it. And this is also akin to, do you deal with the bettors? Do you deal with the big boys like that? Or do you take money from agents? Because that's another avenue, similar to disrespecting the integrity of the game. And unfortunately, I think all athletes need to be reminded that you're there with your school, regardless of your sport. You're there with your school, and you're representing yourself and that school. And it's important that, you know, you gotta stay on the straight and narrow. And here's the other thing guys need to realize: if they're NFL prospects and they get involved with that, those guys are going to come after them when they're in the pros. I mean, I don't think there's any letting go there. It's kind of like, no, turn your back and never get involved with that sort of thing, because I think it'll just haunt you. Not only, of course, like I said, it ruins the game.
It ruins the game. Joel, you want to weigh in on some of this?
Well, Ohio for Responsible Gaming stated on their website, prospects of incidents like the one in Toledo and the other NCAA gambling scandals throughout the years have resurfaced now that the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that states have the authority to legalize sports gambling. Amateur athletes are at the highest risk because there are no paychecks. They don't make any money, White said. They get a stipend a month, and a gambler throws down $10,000 in front of them and says, fix one game. You do not even need to lose. Just don't cover the point spread. There's a good chance they will do it. So, guys, from your perspective as former college players, is the problem getting worse, or the veil of being lifted off gambling, or is the veil being lifted off gambling like the prohibition? Steve or Gary?
I mean, I have to say that, again, I know that some people need money, and there has to be a way. And this also opens up another uncomfortable conversation. Do we pay our college athletes? And and maybe that would avoid being tempted by, gamblers, being tempted by, going that direction. I think I'm not a gambler, so I'm the guy that goes in the casino and I give my wife $20. I take $20 and spin the slots, and then we're done. That's it. That's all I can handle. But when it comes to the game, I don't know. My heart gets pretty big when I think about, hey, how lucky are we to play a college sport? How lucky are we to get to the next level? You don't want to jeopardize that by going down that route. But I understand, though, if you come from nothing and you're on a full ride, doesn't matter where you are, you still have expenses that aren't covered. And that's the hard thing. How do you explain that to somebody that, like you said, there's $10,000 on the table? What do you do?
I think it's interesting that, to have both sides of the spectrum, right? Because the other thing is that some people, it ends up being their aversions, right? Some people can gamble one time, throw a quarter in, whatever, lose it and go. And the other people can get addicted. And that's where it really can get, tricky, because now some people didn't even know they had an issue with gambling at all, but you're getting put in these positions based on, your circumstances. Gary, what's your take as well?
Joel, ask that question again. I was listening, and could you ask that again?
Yeah, it was from your perspective as former college players, is the problem getting worse, or is the veil being lifted off gambling like the prohibition? Is that a good thing or bad thing?
I got you. Well, first of all, I'm 50, so I haven't been around sports and collegiate athletes for a while, and an athlete that's 23 years old that would be on the show, they would probably know a lot more, just coming from college. But I would say it's getting worse, hearing those statistics and, just seeing news and seeing how people get in trouble for different things. So I see it's getting worse. But like Steve was saying, I mean, there is a solution. It's a financial thing. And I mean, I've thought of a bunch of ideas. One, you got to graduate from school, Two, to graduate from school, you got to get grades. You got to go to school. You can't cheat, right? So those are some other things you're making sure happens. Two, you got to, go through with all the rules, drugs. You can't do that kind of stuff. You got to obey all the rules of the school and as an athlete. And so to get through that, and then once you get through, I think what I can see happening is maybe collegiate sports as different divisions. They collect money. They're making millions and millions of dollars. And so you're taking money and you're putting it into some kind of fund. It almost serves as like a pension fund for when these athletes who have accomplished 1, 2, and 3, that when they're 65 years old, they're going to be able to get some pension. And a part of that is the whole gambling thing. That's rule number 3 or 4. You can't do it. You can't get, if anything you get caught, you don't get be a part of that pension fund. So anyway, I think it's probably getting worse, but it's not just gambling. I mean, there's lots of stuff going on. What I think of when I think of gambling as well, and not to get into the drugs and steroids and stuff, but I mean, gambling is bad, but man, you got steroids. I mean, isn't that gambling? Taking steroids, don't you call that's a gamble right there? I mean, if you win that unlucky lottery, and you get caught, you're in trouble, But sometimes it's like, hey, 1 strike, 2 strike, 3 strike. Hey, how about just 1 strike and you're out? Because anyway, I don't want to start talking about steroids and that kind of stuff, but that is a way that athletes are getting ahead, and it's not really them. It's, taking something else. But I don't know. Hopefully, Joel, you got your answer.
I guess it's also like you're being put in these situations where you're not able, you're like forced in these situations, and hopefully you don't put yourself in a situation where you are forced to make those type of hard decisions.
Excellent. Let's go to Chastity. She's going to talk about, speaking of integrity, Gary, you kind of brought that up. We have Chastity Saunier, and she's going to share a few points with us. Good morning, Chastity.
Good morning. How are y'all?
Okay. You coming at us from Texas, aren't you?
Yes, and it's funny, when I was reading, listening to y'all about that Oilers game, I was 9 years old when that happened, and I remember it. And my uncle used to play for the Oilers. So that was a very interesting year in my family's house. I do remember that. I didn't know everything was going on, but I do remember that particular game. So literally on the topic of integrity of sports, they say at Purdue athletic director Mike Bonaski said that schools already discuss gambling and the point shaving for student athletes. But he said they will have to be more diligently, comprehensive, and intentionally moving forward to protect school integrity. Once you lose that, you're shot, he said. If people don't trust that what's happening in front of them is really legit, they can get away with it. So I guess my question to Hype, Steve, Joel, everybody on the panel, from your perspective, have we lost the integrity of sports? How does that impact the next generation? Should college athletes get paid?
I strongly believe that there needs to be a trickle effect with all of the resources that these major schools have. I went to a smaller school, and believe me, we didn't get a thing, not a penny. We got nothing, which is the way it should be, because that's how it's written now. But some of these big schools that make huge money for their institutions, those players, I think there should be some sort of they should disperse some of this profit to these kids, especially those in need. And Gary brought up a great point about something like a pension. I was almost thinking something that would kick in a little bit sooner for those, for like a disability fund, because a lot of those guys that play college ball, they're hurt, and those injuries kind of really take a toll on their lives, in the 40s or 30s or 50s, sooner than, the average retirement age. From that, I think there's ways to really ensure that these guys are comfortable and know that there is some sort of a fund that they can not sort of rely on, knowing that they will be supported that way, so that they're not tempted to go the other side. And again, I'm a firm believer that I still watch college sports. I watch the pros. I watch all kinds of sports. I still think that the game is there. I just, for me, gambling's a dirty word, and I just don't want to hear it in sports. That's how I look at it. And I'm not saying I'm turning a blind eye, but I think that there has to be ways to keep everybody clean.
That's awesome. Steve, you said something that was very interesting that deals with the pension and Hype concerning integrity. That's a life skill, because if you think about it, if you have a 9-to-5 job or a corporate job, you have a 401k, you have a pension program. And if you teach those and you have those programs in place, you're teaching them life skills, you're teaching them character and integrity. Because if you're not putting those things in place, they can go the opposite way. And, when we're talking about if it's ethical or non-ethical, well, this is the thing. Okay, in 50 states, they've made it legal for the state to do so. That's perfectly cool. But what happens when a person wants their money and that child can't pay that money because they built on something? There's always consequences of making it legal and making it unlegal. So I think people really need to look at it from that perspective.
Absolutely. And I kind of equate it to, getting off the subject of direct betting, but I'm Canadian. In Canada, they've legalized marijuana, but that doesn't mean everybody can take it and get behind the wheel. It may be legal, but certain things you don't do. And same with betting, same with, jeopardizing the integrity of the game. That's what we're talking about. And, Gary also brought up the point about steroids. It's just another form of cheating. And what are you willing to do to make it? What are you willing to do to not only make the team, but to excel in your sport? But then again, at what cost? And that's sort of the level here. Like, how far do you go? How far do you go for your personal gain, but then risking the integrity of the game? And I think that's important.
Excellent. Gary, did you want to weigh in on that as well?
I mean, I agree with all those things. And Chastity, it's, I don't think, like sports in college, I don't think people don't look at a game saying, it's over. We already know Alabama's going to win because they're cheating or something like that. I don't think that people have this perception. They can see week by week what's going on, what players normally do, and like, oh wait, why did that guy go out of bounds? He could have had another 2 or 3 yards. I mean, that doesn't happen in college, and I think people are smart enough to see that. If they saw that in college, man, there'd be some stuff being talked about. So I don't think I see that. And basically, Steve just said it all. I just, I agree with everything. I agree with Steve,
All right, great. Well, you know what we're going to do? We're going to take a sponsor break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the mental psyche side of all of this and weigh in on that.
Uncomfortable Conversations Talk Radio is sponsored by the Trendsetter Mentor Group, an exclusive membership for mentorship. You can follow all our hosts on Facebook. Search Trendsetter Mentor Group and join. Now back to the show.
Well, there has been a direct link between mental wellness and gambling, which you go, what could that be? Well, of course, I got to bring in, I would say you were a doctor. Maybe you stayed at a Holiday Inn once, but you are RT sports correspondent, Steve Christakis. But in this case, you think it would be just common sense to think there's a link, but now there's actual science that puts behind it.
Right, yeah, we don't typically think about sports and mental health in the same sentence, but now...
Well, I don't know. During football season, I question a lot of people's mental health.
Yeah, I agree with
especially
you there.
Especially if they support teams outside the SEC.
Okay, that's another topic of conversation.
I have to bring that in. Go.
Big Ten all the way. Okay, but we're talking about the SEC, the Southeastern Conference, your favorite conference. Now, the commissioner there, Greg Sankey, at Media Day brought up a good point, an angle on this whole sports betting being legalized. It could bring up another issue now because he says that the element of due to legalized sports gambling, there will be another element of pressure put on these athletes, basically. And he went on to say his concerns were saying, we're seeing trends in the mental health area that should cause us all to pause before these ideas around specific event betting within college sports are allowed to take place. And I'm talking about, for example, whether a field goal is made or missed, whether a three-point try is successful, is a pitch, a strike, or a ball. So prop bets, basically, he's concerned about. And this is these athletes are young, 18, 19. They already have enough pressure on them to perform. And now all 50 states are allowed to, after the Supreme Court ruling in May, they're allowed to legalize sports betting, but only 7 have done it so far. But experts are saying that within 5 years, more than half of the states, about 30-something, would legalize.
Once again,
betting.
And we saw the corruption. Not that I'm against sports betting, but we've seen the corruption that has come into it when you're talking about the professional sports. Now you're going to bring it into college. I can see the idea of putting more pressure on it, and not only from you, but your families. I mean, you can't do insider trading. How is this any different? I mean, if you if you actually put the money against your own child's team and the team that your child plays on, what kind, that could definitely create some tension, even a little bit more rougher than what you'd have at the Thanksgiving table over politics.
Right, and they already, like you said, they go after these student athletes' families already because they know some of them come from poorer families who need money, and they're not getting paid. These athletes, we know college athletes don't get paid. So they're vulnerable to being preyed upon, and there's more of an incentive for these shady figures or bookies to go after them and offer them money to change the outcome of a game, maybe fix the game, or there could be point shaving involved. So sports gambling being legalized brings a whole other element, and Greg Sankey brought that to the table at Media Day. But now he's saying that presidents and chancellors of some SEC universities are seeking federal legislation now to regulate sports gambling in terms of maybe eliminating specific in-game betting and proposition bets.
Well, it'd be interesting to see if they're going to step into this. I know this is the first part of the conversation because it just takes one time. We've already seen the corruption and parents getting their kids in through athletics. It'll be interesting to see if they're actually step and stop this before it starts.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us, Steve.
Wow, that video kind of said it all, didn't it? I mean, it's actually talking about some of the things we kind of already crested them a little bit. The pressure, the point shaving, the kick. Steve. I think you brought that up. And so that kind of go hand in hand, the sports betting. Now, one thing I got out of that video was the pressure they put on the families. Gary, you talked about these college players don't have a lot of money. They come from maybe, people that have, financially a little bit less. And I didn't even realize they would go to the families of these players and engage them in this sports betting. That puts a lot of pressure and a lot of mental pressure. So let's kind of talk about that a little bit. I'm going to go to Steve for this because I know we had a conversation about this. You kind of mentioned it earlier, some of those conversations they had with you pregame, let's talk about the mental pressure side of that.
Yeah, I mean, say in a situation where you're approached, and if you're a field goal kicker, that is what they were alluding to. Part of that conversation was end of the game, something that's going to determine the score, something that's going to determine the outcome of a game. You approach a field goal kicker in college and say, look, man, no matter what happens, you're not going to make that last one. That's, I think there has to be steps made. And now whether it's federal legislation, I don't know what, but something has to be done where that can't be an option. You can't approach a player in that situation and say, I don't know how you do it, mind you. But I mean, I guess at the end of the day is you don't want any of your players approached at all. But how do you stop that? But in the case of, point shaving or missing a field goal or getting to an umpire, like, is a ball a strike or a pitch a strike or a ball? I mean, these are all elements of the game that, people can be approached. But how do we get that out of there? How do we get that out of there? And if you're going to legalize gambling, that's fine, but stay away from the athletes. That has to be enforced somehow, some way.
Excellent. Gary, you want to weigh in on that?
Oh, you know how I do it with Joel? I'm forgetful. No, I'm taking notes here. What? Okay, so
the question's going back to the video, and we've got the sports gambling, the pressure. So what about the mental anxiety, the mental side of that?
Yeah, I mean, so here's the deal. It doesn't matter if it's gambling, if it's drug use, if it's not touching the line when you're supposed to touch the line in your sport, in practice, when it doesn't really seem like it matters. It's just like, I think, what I believe, in like what I started, Sabrina, what allowed me to get to that rock bottom place was me, even though I did touch the line, but there were a bunch of lines in life I wasn't touching, right? I was skipping that. And it wasn't illegal. Some of these things weren't illegal, but they weren't good for me. They weren't what I believed. It wasn't what the coach said to do. A lot of it has to do with my faith. Like, how's God want me going through life? Does he want me touching this line, skipping that line? Oh, I'm going to skip that line because I'm going to make some money. And what I found is that all these, I call them temporary highs. When you're skipping lines, you get the shiny on the outside. It's just temporary. It might be for a night, might be for a week, might be for a month. I don't know. It comes and goes. And so what I think is more important is to get the shine on the inside. How do you shine on the inside? To shine on the inside, what I'm getting chills, by the way, thinking about this, but really what it is, it's contentment. It's peace. And I'll tell you what, do you want contentment or do you want to shine for a week? Do you want contentment or you want $10,000 that's going to go pretty quick? Do you want contentment or do you want that, that fun, amazing night that's going to leave you the next morning with a headache, with bad choices, with questioning yourself, which then carries on to the practice field where like, oh my goodness, I'm so tired. And then it continues on through the week. And then you play your game and you're like wondering about your choices from the last week. I mean, like all of these bad choices, we carry these around. And so to go through life, I think it's so important, whether we're talking gambling or anything else, is that, you got to make good choices. These good choices are the foundation to your peace, to your mental health.
Wow. Impactful, very impactful. Chastity, you want to weigh in on that a little bit? You've got some comments to make about that?
Yes. Well, a PhD sports psychiatrist, Emma Vickers, stated, if a competitive athlete begins to gamble, it can take a little as one win to get them hooked and one loss to want that win back. And this is how the cycle of addiction can begin. I think Joel talked about addiction earlier. Normally, when a loss takes place in gambling, a normal reaction for a person who is not at risk is simple participation in an innocent means of entertainment would not basically be continued. However, the competitive athlete may begin to employ specific strategies and begin making changes on how they gamble, when they gamble, and what they gamble on. With that of mindset, they can create different situations which will result into a win. So my question, based on that information, to Hype and Steve, can we honestly say that sport betting is ethical?
I think in the confines of, I mean, I have no problem with someone going down and betting on the horse races or a basketball game. But, you know, again, I think the cutoff is approaching athletes. That's the cutoff. I mean, they have to be protected. You know, you can't tell people not to gamble because they will. And where there's money to be made, it'll continue to do it. But on the other hand, I think there has to be something in there, something at each school or a team. Like I said, you know, when we were going in the Super Bowl, the NFL came over and said, hey, be aware, you've been warned. And I think my biggest concern is not only doing it once, but I think once they have their hooks in you, they have you. You're already guilty, and they know that. And then you're exposed even more. And I think but then combining with what you're saying with an athlete's competitive nature, that's a dangerous combination. And that's a great point. I think, you know, you take the mental aspect of somebody that's already driven that way to succeed, and then you throw money on top of that. It makes it, you know, very difficult to turn down. And I think that's the real issue. And I think, like I said before, we have to protect the athletes so they don't start in the first place, regardless of their situation. And then back to Gary's point, how can they do that? And I like this idea of some sort of a runoff from the college profits to help protect these guys and women, of course, too, as well, in all sports.
And actually, I was going to ask you guys, in your opinion, do you think that with them legalizing gambling and well, it's said in most states, not all of them yet, or some states are doing that. Do you think it actually takes the pressure off the players now? Because now that it's a legal deal, they're not necessarily approaching players. Or do you think that's still happening? What do you guys think?
I would probably say that, you know, just being out of it, I can't really give the right answer, you know, for that, Joel. But I think, you know what, it all comes down to, like what Chastity, you were saying is, you know, like talking about all these, you know, the gambling and this and that. It all comes down to, I think, this foundation of each athlete. And you can't just come in, Steve. I mean, it's great that they come in, they say, hey, everybody, there's going to be some people that might be talking to you, especially to the kickers, the quarterbacks, the receivers, the running backs, you know, those who can make a difference in the game. But I think it's important not just to like let people know, not to just let them know like the day of the big game or a week before, but do it first year. Athletes, these freshmen come in and you're helping them build this foundation that's like a solid foundation where they know what's right and what's wrong. They know going to school and not cheating and the way you treat people and the way you go through life. It's so important that these choices they're making, that they have this strong foundation. I mean, and so again, I don't want to get on my foundation as kind of a faith foundation, and that's what, you know, leads me to making the right choices. But there needs to be something going on with these kids right when they get into school, and you got to keep it consistent so that when they're approached, it's easy. It's like, no, get away, you know, like no choice.
It's the level of integrity. Basically, people test you out. Your first impression is a lasting impression. And sometimes in this situation, people test your integrity. And it's either you have it or you don't. It's like one time going at it, and either you're going to make that strong impression and tell a person, this is what I stand for, or yeah, I'll do this to get this. And they can basically know what type of person your character is, and it forms you as a young person. But I don't think young people really understand that to that magnitude if they wasn't taught and had the foundation.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's important. I think it's important to have the foundation. And then, like you said, you know, you got to keep it consistent so that when they're approached, they don't start in the first place, regardless of their situation. And then back to Gary's point, how can they do that? And I like this idea of something sort of a runoff from the college profits to help protect these guys. And
Very powerful thoughts today, Chastity. Thank you so much for that comment. We want to thank all of you, our guests, again, Steve Christie, Gary Rogers. Want to thank Chastity Saunier, Joel Holtz for a phenomenal topic. We covered that well. Uncomfortable conversation, you know, the legal side, the ethical side, the moral side, the mental pressure, pressure on and off the field, the game of life, as Gary says. So we certainly want to thank all of you for bringing these things to light and being able to talk about them without controversy. So Uncomfortable Conversation, we come at you every week, the same time, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And for our listeners, if you have any questions or comments on our topic today or any other topics regarding this, send us an email to uncomfortableconversationtmg@gmail.com, and we'd love to share those on our show. You can also follow our host and our guest on Trendsetter Mentorship Group. That's a Facebook page. We love to see you. We love for you to comment on these guests. They've done a phenomenal job. And we're going to see you next week. Thank you for joining Uncomfortable Conversation. Again, thank you, guest and co-host. We'll see you next week.